now we are through with the concept of measurement, assessment, and evaluation. Let us now discuss the assessment as an evaluation tool for learning outcomes. Here, paano ba talaga nalalaman ng mga teacher kung nakakatuto ang kanilang mga estudyante sa mga itinuturo nila? So, how does a teacher know? Many educational practitioners agree that measure of one's teaching is indicated by what the children have learned. So the teacher cannot claim that he or she has taught if the students have not learned anything. So nakadepende yung effectiveness ng pagtuturo sa mga naiintindihan ng mga bata. Hindi niya basta-basta pwedeng sabihin na kahit siya ay nagtuturo ay wala natututunan yung bata. So let us find out in this lesson that assessment of learning is also an evaluation process that tells whether the intended learning outcomes through the teaching learning process have been converted into achieving learning outcomes. So we will also find out here that learning outcome can be measured through the use of different assessment tools. So let us now try to understand the levels of learning outcomes, which is placed in the acronym KPUP. So KPUP stands for Knowledge, Process, Understanding, and Performance or Product. So KPUP reflects different learning outcomes that are arranged in hierarchy or complexity based on what I have created in the PowerPoint. So knowledge being the basic level of learning outcomes, and then performance in the top, or performance or product being the advanced level of learning outcomes. So let us look how these learning outcomes are calibrated. So later on, we will find examples in how each level is assessed. So the first level of learning outcomes targets factual, conceptual, and procedural knowledge and metacognition. So in assessing this level of learning outcomes, think about what you want your students to know. Ano ba yung gusto mong matutunan ng estudyante, malaman ng estudyante in terms of facts, concepts, procedure, and multiple thinking. So, example, you may ask them the different parts of the body. You can ask them to explain how to dissect a frog or describe a typhoon from different views. So level 2, we have the process. When we access process, we take a look at the skills that the students used based on the facts and information to making and understanding. So in assessing this level of learning outcomes, we think of what you want your students to do with what they know. Ano yung gusto mong gawin ng mga estudyante mo about doon naman sa nalaman nila. So it is just like a continuation. Kung natutunan na nila sa first level is natutunan na nila, nalaman na nila yung facts or concept about that particular thing, ano naman in process, ano naman yung gusto mong ipagawa do sa estudyante mo about their learning or about sa nalaman nila. For example, is to identify the parts of the frog's body after dissecting it. So, kanina, sa knowledge is to how to dissect a frog. In a process, i-identify naman ng student yung part ng frog after dissecting it. So let's move on with level 3, which is understanding. So we take a look at how our students understood big ideas and concepts. And so when assessing, we ask ourselves, what do you want your students to understand? So kung kanina, ano yung kailangan mong malaman? Ano yung gustong malaman ng estudyante mo? And then next is ano yung ipapagawa about doon sa nalaman. Here in understanding, ano naman yung gusto mong ipaintindi sa iyong estudyante. For example is to how do the elements of weather interact to produce climate change. So the answer to this would give us the kind of assessment that will give our learners. So now let's move on with the fourth level, which is the product or the performance. So this fourth level focuses on the learner's application of their knowledge to creating a material or a tangible product or presenting an oral, visual, or written performance as an evidence of their learning. So some example of product and performance are dramatization, research projects, and paintings. So a portfolio can also do because if it is asked from the learners to serve as an evidence of accomplishment of learning outcomes. So now that we have a clear understanding of the different levels of learning, let's talk about the different assessment tools for each level of learning outcome. So here are some type of tests to measure knowledge, process, and understanding. So first we have the objective test. These tests are these tests require only one and only correct answer. It is difficult to conduct but easy to check. So a great example of objective test is the paper and pencil test. So we call it a puppet. As the name suggests, the test is written on paper and requires pencil to write. However, with modern times, a pencil and paper test can also be translated to an electronic version, which makes the test paperless. So, because of the technology, naging hindi na siya mano-mano as paper and test, naging electronic version na siya. So, these tests are simple recall, alternative response test, multiple choice test, and matching type test. So, paano nasabi na naging electronic version na siya? Kasi nowadays, especially now we are dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, teachers are now giving their tests through Google Forms. So, they are doing it online. So, if the learning outcomes, which indicate learning ability to originate or express ideas, this is difficult now if the test is through objective type. That is why we have subjective type test. In this type of test, answers through reflections, insights, and opinions can be given through essay. So essays are test items that allow students the freedom of response. They are free to select, relate, and present ideas in their own words. So this type of answers would reflect the extent of the learner's knowledge of the subject matter, their ability to use high-order thinking skills, and to express ideas in an accurate and creative manner. There are different types of essay test items teachers can use. Yung mga ginagamit ng teachers sa atin. So, we have restricted and response item, which is like an expanded form of short answers type objective test. So, in this type of test, there is a limit on both and content scope and the form of student response. So it is most useful in measuring learning outcomes that require the interpretation and application of data in specific area. So the restricted response essay item reassures the student's ability to explain cause and effect. So relationships describe application of principles, valid conclusion, enumerate and explain the methods and procedure. So the next type of essay is the extended response. Here, the student is generally free to select any factual information that can help in organizing the response. So the content of an extended essay will depend on the analysis, synthesis, evaluation, and other higher order thinking skills of the test taken. So the extended response essay items measure students' ability to organize ideas, integrate learning designs, and experiment or evaluate the worth of idea. So level 4 of the learning outcomes in K-pop or the product or performance can be assessed. These learning outcomes can best be done through the use of authentic evaluation. In authentic evaluation, it is a test that measures real-life task performance and actual product. So the most common of the authentic assessment are the performance assessment and the use of portfolio. So there are different kinds of performance assessment tools. First, we have the checklist. The checklist is a tool that consists of a list of qualities that are expected to be observed or present, or absent the presence is to be marked or checked, and the absence is marked as an X. So here is an example of a checklist. So another tool we can use to assess performance in product is a rating scale. So in a rating scale, it is a tool that uses a scale in a number line as a basis to estimate the numerical value of a performance or a product. So the value here is easier to score if the points are in whole numbers. So the most popular rating scale is called the Likert scale. So here is an example of a rating scale. And another tool we can use is the rubrics for portfolio. So a portfolio is a compilation of the experiences as the authentic learning outcomes presented with evidence and reflections. So portfolio at the end of the SEM, we are required to create a portfolio. So here, to assess the total learning experience as presented in a holistic package, it is an assessment tool called a rubric is utilized. Here is an example of a rubric for a field study course portfolio. In this example, there are only 3 criteria. As you can see, there are description, numerical values for each criteria. Levels of assessment. It describes the level of learning outcomes, which are knowledge, process or skills, understanding, and products or performance. The levels of the learning outcomes are also used to describe the level of assessment through the Department of Education Order Number 73, Series of 2012. So the levels of learning outcomes are also the levels of assessment. In other words, the level of assessment follow also the levels of thinking skills from lower level to higher level. So in this table, we can see the different levels of learning outcomes or assessment. So the second column, we can see what to test or what to assess on the third. We can also see there the type of assessment for each level of the learning outcomes. And in the fourth column is the percentage value in assessment. So let us take it a look for a while and try to understand. So the 4 level may be employed in the formative assessment, but the result is not recorded. So it will just tell how the students are progressing. So on the other hand, K-pop format is required for summative purposes. Summative assessment, which are recorded for grading. So the computed value of the 4 levels of learning outcomes assessment will be described according to the value of the composite scores of the students. So the interval scale of the computed 4 level learning outcomes are given level proficiency descriptions. So this interpretation is used for all the learning areas or subjects in basic education. So the table shows the different levels of proficiency description and corresponding composite score in summative grades in percentage. Here we can see that students who get a grade of 74 and below belongs to the beginning level. Those 75 to 79 are described as developing. Those who get 80 to 84 are categorized as those who are approaching proficiency. And those who get 85 to 89 are considered proficient, and those who get rating 90 and above are considered advanced. And that ends my report. Thank you for listening.